Hi, everyone. My name is Swan Lee, and I am the president of Business Today. This afternoon, I have the pleasure of moderating our social impact and globalization panel. On the panel today, we have Augusta, who is the executive director at Agency, Claire Parker, who is the executive creative director at Design Bridges, and Doug, the VP head of D&I at Richmond. First of all, I would like to extend a big thank you to our three panelists for dedicating their time to the Design Nation Conference. I know that I am personally extremely thrilled to hear more about your experiences and your perspectives on issues regarding social impact and globalization, and I know that many of the students listening in right now are as well. So to kick things off, I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves and briefly touch on what you do and what you specialize in. So we can just go in the order across my screen. It's going to be Claire, Augusta, and Doug.
Oh, I get to go first. That means I set the pattern that everyone was hoping I would go second. So my name is Claire Parker. I am the managing partner and executive creative director of Design Bridge. I'm based in New York, but we're an agency that's founded in the UK 35 years ago. And we have studios in London, Amsterdam, New York, Shanghai, Singapore, and Mumbai. And what we do is we create brands. We're brand creatives. And so we work on the brands across all kinds of sectors. And the common thread being that we really like to find the real human insight and understand the real truth and the personality of that brand and bring it to life in a way that is enduring and memorable. It's not just a fad of the moment, but we're really kind of catching hold of something that has a truth. And I have the privilege to work in a sector that I absolutely love, and it's given me the opportunity to live all over the world as well. So New York is my latest stop. But before here, I was in London, I was in Singapore, I was in Sydney, I was in Hong Kong, I was in Amsterdam, and I still only speak English. I'm very sorry.
I love that.
That's
Over to you.
amazing. Thank you. My name is Augusta Meal. I am the founder and executive director of Agency Design, and we are a 5-year-old experiment. We're a nonprofit that seeks to use the tools of human-centered design as levers towards system change. And we work with communities and organizations and teams to help them towards their equity and justice goals by incorporating design methods. And I'm joining you from my attic in Boston, Massachusetts. And a lot of our work is very deeply grounded in communities across Boston.
That's great. Hi, everyone. My name is Doug Melville, and this is probably my third or fourth Design Nation conference. And maybe, I don't know when you started, but I've been there since year 1 or maybe 2. So I've had the honor of speak previous years, and I'm a chief diversity officer over the last 10 years of my career. For the last 9 years, I worked in advertising, really helping Madison Avenue overall diversify through process and procedure across all of our people, our culture, and also across the work that we put out. And recently, I moved over to luxury, to Fifth Avenue, where I work for the Richemont Group, which is one of the leaders in luxury and fashion and accessories. So I think this conversation is growing in corporations. It's very empowering to see all the different voices and opinions and people that now are having their voices elevated. Also, the unique moment we're in where public policy and private companies are all seeing kind of the same trends and the same changes and evolutions. I do this work because of my family. So I'm a 5th generation diversity change agent, and going back to my triple great grandfather who worked for Ulysses S. Grant and was the first Black allowed in the White House. My family has worked under 10 different presidential administrations to create the policy to desegregate the military, to so many different advisors to presidents in this area. So for me, the work is long. It starts small. It's using the system to diffuse the system, and I'm so happy that everyone at Princeton and the rest of your colleagues and students got a chance to create this and move this conference online this year. So congratulations again on that.
Thank you so much. Our team did an absolute phenomenal job. So I'm incredibly proud of them. But to start off, I have a question for the entire panel. How has your company adapted and benefited from the globalization trend in business and design? And in what ways have aspects of different cultures or contexts changed the way that you approached your own work?
Well, I can go first. Hey, I see your dog. I just want to say that I think COVID accelerated a lot of trends of globalization. For some, it pushed the trends back, which is, free borders, traveling, all the things we're kind of aware of, mobility. But what it did is it pushed people to explore, and it broke down a lot of systematic, I call them systematic microaggressions, that were in the processes and the procedures all across industries. I think the exciting thing is how digital design is now being integrated into real life design. Remember, we were kind of in a liminal space where people were like, well, how do you take digital and put it into retail? How do you, take the internet and make it come to life? But now we were pushed into a moment where we were forced to look at digital first in many areas and then now integrate that in. And that's the beauty of the opportunity that we have to really change culture around design and actually use this time to redesign the workforce of the future for our clients, which are our employees, but also for our customers and our clients externally that are looking to, find us where they are.
I think for us, we're maybe a little bit of a different flavor because so much of our work is local and like intentionally localized, and a lot of the work we do is about is based on a history of trust and relationships and being in community with the folks that we're working with, and that certainly has been challenged by the constraints of the pandemic, and especially thinking about questions of access with the often marginalized communities that we're working with. And I think that seeing that kind of digital first impulse happen that you described, Doug, I would just like add a yes and to that, which has been, it's also been really wonderful to see people considering like who is left out and who's invisible when we move to digital first systems. So in Boston, I think something like 40% of students in Boston did not log on to remote learning. Shocking, right? And so that's the sort of access question that we are, I think now everybody is like face to face with. And to the globalization point, I would say the way that we see it most is actually in a lot of the immigrant communities. So in Boston, that's folks from Brazil or Haiti or Cape Verde, and we get to see this kind of multi-generational relationship and cultural exchange, and that shows up in our design in different ways. And I think there's a wonderful ongoing conversation to be had around how to do that in ways that are not appropriative and are respectful of those cultures.
So perfectly on time, my little dog comes to join in the conversation, so I just need to keep her happy with a few little treats. So yeah, just building on actually what Doug has said and Augusta as well. I think that for all this is about technology. It's about humans first. And I think just sending everybody home from our studios, wherever we were, and then realizing people didn't have great internet connections. And this is like privileged people who are working, let alone people who didn't even have access to computers, and how being able to set our own people up for success and to interact and then worry about them because they're no longer connected in the way they were before. So more junior people, I feel like I'm in meetings all day long, but then there's a more junior person. You might speak to one person a day around the things that you're doing. And then you think about that just within your small world. And then you start to move it out. And you think then about the greater social impact of as much as we think that we can be moving forward due to technology. It's also the thing, as you're saying, Augusta, that sets us apart. So if I think one of the key things about all of this has made us all realize the kind of humanity at the root of what we're doing, and always trying to strive to find that, and recognizing that your world. And I know it's been something for me that starting out on my career path, I always used to have a chip on my shoulder, but I was Northern and I was a woman in an industry that, and you would feel a certain way, and then you kind of go, well, hang on a minute. When I moved to another country, then there's way other challenges, and then you see the situation there. And so I think the more open we are to globalization and what it means for other people to interact and engage, then the richer all of our lives become, because great ideas spawn great ideas, don't they? And creativity is about a diversity of ingredients all coming together as you least expect it. So yeah, when we think globally, I think we almost need to think it's not one thing, it's all kinds of things that just happen to be connected. And the more we can enforce those connections, the better.
Yeah, I think those are all very interesting points that you guys bring up, from looking at the effects of globalization and digitization at different levels, from the local level, like Augusta touched on, all the way up until looking at digitization in certain industries and how you can transfer that over into like things like retail, like Doug talked about. So I think those are all really great points. The next question is, how has your company reacted to creating more equitable and just opportunities for people of color and women? What other obstacles or ways of thinking have yet to be addressed and also challenged?
Well, while my dog's eating a biscuit, I'll jump in with that one. That obviously lots of organisations reflected on this with all of the things that have been happening last year, and we were always kind of quite proud of how inclusive we felt that we were. And when we looked at ourselves, we realised we were passively inclusive, because of the way that we had been. Yes, there's lots of women in management, and we work in different countries, but when you actually then think actively and you look at the diversity across the studios, so starting to put into place, we put together committees across all of the studios so that we would have more voices around it. We looked at things that we could do. We've really kind of signed up and said this is our role to be anti-racist as an agency. We are all about diversity and inclusion, and that goes all the way down to how we get new recruits into the studio, and that we shouldn't be looking in the same places all the time, because some people can't even go through conventional education. And our former chief creative officer started as a studio intern at 17. He never went to university, ended up as a chief creative officer. So just even understanding that where people come from, and casting that net broader, and going from passive to active in our choices, I think has been a huge step for us. And it's a journey that we're just starting on, but one that will only benefit us, because it will just make everything that we do better and richer.
I would say, I think I look at this subject and that question around industries. So, when I was working in advertising, the beauty was Madison Ave as an industry all took a stand together. The thing is, if people are hiring from other companies, their other peer groups, their competitors, if the whole industry doesn't work together to really get and address this subject, it's so hard to make change, because through natural turnover, people historically just hire people from other similar size companies with similar client categories and things of that nature. So what I feel really came out of a lot of the past year, looking at luxury, is the luxury companies overall as an industry have started to address and make spaces and speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion by creating DEI roles, by creating safe spaces internally. So I think that's a really important part of the conversation, is what makes the evolution tangible. And it happened in fashion. It happened in advertising. You could look at other industries, banking, you could look at, hedge funds, you could look at, other areas of business that aren't design associated. But typically the industries work and align in some way together. And I think that's been the real, result or the receipt of some of the last year, is how many industries and companies are making the space and elevating it, with the creation of a role. Some people say that, do you need a diversity, equity, inclusion officer at a company? or is it everyone's role? Well, it's everyone's role to be creative, but there's still a chief creative officer. There's everyone's role to be fiscally responsible, but there's still a chief finance officer. So I think it's important that, in this moment, that we reflect on the power of industries to make moves and shift in this space, and look at that as like the opening of a new opportunity, as the beginning. I think it is the onus on the company, but it's more exciting to me when you see a larger kind of palatial shift in how the conversation is working within the companies and within the clientele.
Absolutely. And just to build on that, Doug, it's kind of like, we know that we're part of WPP, and they also have the goals that they're heading towards, but also measuring what it is that we want to achieve, and then declaring that as well, and so that we can actually track the difference that we're making. But also, it's not just about what we do, all of our clients, the impact that we can have with our clients. So the work that we're doing and putting towards them, we are creating the future. So if we're kind of capturing photography styles, or this is what you need to be, then everything that we're doing in there, then we should be reflecting of the society that's around us. And the work and it was brought up from senior designers in the London studio, just working on something like finding stock images. There are some good stock image companies out there. And one of the ones that was actually WPP's their biggest client, we discovered, was Shutterstock. But when you do a search on there, all the algorithms, you put in wash your hands, you'll just see lots of white hands being washed. So we actually went to them with that point of view and said, actually, you're not reflecting diversity. And it's the way in which things are being tagged and how it's being shown. And even if people are contributing images, it was actually even throwing out almost false narratives because of the way things appeared as well. And because of that, Shutterstock just put their hands up and were like, oh yeah, this is all stuff that we want to work towards. And so that's driven by a senior designer in the studio went, hey, has anybody noticed this? And I do feel that's just because the conversation is out there and people feel that they have the agency to do something about it. So yeah, I'm very proud of what they've done there, and that's just one example of something. So if that's one little change happening, just imagine what the ramifications could be across other things.
That's such a great tangible example, and I think we also, I mean, we're tiny. We're a 6-person firm, so we don't have hiring power or muscle like that. But we also are focused, I think, like you're saying, Doug, on the on the industry and the practice side as designers, and in our own practice, interrogating human-centered design processes, and attempting or aspiring in our work to debias them, to bring trauma-informed practices into them, et cetera. And also starting to think about what does that look like for, like you're saying, Claire, the next generation of designers. So as an example, we're working with Massachusetts College of Art and Design, which is our local state art school, to help 2 departments there redesign their departmental experience, to really focus on the experience of students of color, so that hopefully in the future it doesn't have to be one senior designer raising their hand, but that the generation of designers can be brought up with this sensibility.
And I think the thing, Augusta, is we are designing the workforce of the future. When you look back, I would always look at why we get Saturday off. And if you read the story, I don't know if you know, Henry Ford, had a lot of chaos at his plant, and then he was trying to earn workers' trust back. So he goes, if you work for us, you get Saturday off. And then all the other car customers said, well, if you work for us, you now get Saturday off. And then every other company's like, well, if they're giving Saturday off, we're giving Saturday off. And the next thing you know, we have a 2-day weekend. So it's like we are in the moment now where we're creating, is it a 2 or 3 day work week? I mean, think of all the design. What is the purpose of the office? Is it really to get work done, or is it for collaboration? Our office is now going to be designed, completely different, where that's the meeting point to share your at-home work, kind of like when we were in school, versus now the time to do the work and then go home and you have time off. So this is just a whole shift. And I think for designers, to really take that word and really look at how wide that could be, because every office, every workforce, Do you design new work weeks? I mean, we're going to really have a moment of, unbelievable creativity, and design's going to affect every single thing around us.
Yeah, Augusta, I did have a question for you, sort of building upon what you had just touched on. Obviously, as executive director of agency, your group works to apply design to complex systems with the goal of reducing structural inequality in America. And I think, especially in the era of remote work, designers are now separate from the communities that they seek to understand. So, how would you say the design thinking process and design products themselves can better reflect the diversity of the communities that are viewing and or like benefiting from their work? And what are some of the real issues in the design industry and its interactions with communities that you think need to be called out?
That's a really meaty question. Thank you. I think, let's see, I think that a summary of the challenge that we see in more commercial design practices is a transactional quality and how designers and design researchers interact with the folks that they're designing for. And we found that not only is it not appropriate and it's not respectful, but like we'll get thrown out of the room if we come into things with that orientation. And during COVID time, which I think you were asking, we've seen like pluses and minuses, right? Like there's challenges around the basic question of access when we're trying to interview folks and we have to weigh, say, do they have the bandwidth or the phone minutes to participate in an interview with us? That's a challenge. And we work around that. We've done a lot of interviews on porches this year. We've gotten folks like, we've got our like Go Kit with a piece of foam core so we can do interviews in a park. So we have some workarounds like that. We've also found that there are some real affordances to some of the digital learning that can make it more accessible for folks. So the ability to like use the chat instead of having to verbalize your answers, or with this project that we're working on with the school that I mentioned, it's actually really wonderful to put students in breakout rooms because their conversations are entirely secure and in a way that they wouldn't be even if we were in a big room together. So it's a really interesting question that we've been talking a lot about in our practice. And like you're saying, Doug, we have a blanker slate than we have in my work life. And so we've been thinking about what do we want to carry forward? What do we want to bring back? And there's this really wide open space. But I think the bigger question you ask about where should we be critiquing design is certainly, there's a lot to touch on there.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Next question is for Claire. For Design Bridge's recent clients have included KinderCare, which is the largest childcare provider in the US, and then as well as Callie, which is a revolutionary period product innovation. How would you say your brand strategists change their thought processes when designing for social impact brands?
In some ways, not, because the way to get to a solution is often the same. It's the ingredients that you have to put in there and understand where the start point is. So with something like KinderCare, they were invisible, and yet what they bring as champions after school care is fundamental part of your learning and education and development. And so they're a branded ingredient almost, that if you see them that way. So you have to understand from a strategic perspective, who is your audience? Because if they had just been brought in as a service and ticked off almost like a commodity, like I need this much toilet paper for the school, I need this many desks, I need this, and that's how it's seen, then you don't see the value behind it. And they couldn't understand what their value was. What were they bringing in this after school moment? And for us, just looking at what's happening societally and what's needed, and the most sought after skill set at the moment is creative problem solving. That's regardless of whether you want to be a creative, but the ability to think creatively. I think there's a real creative crisis. So we're not competing with what the school does. The school does everything brilliantly. We're not competing with what the family does when the kids get home, because parents might even feel guilty about leaving their kids in the after school care. You know, at worst, are they going to get any kind of further education, or is it just more school? But if you think about this as this creativity crisis, and there was this really amazing piece of information that it was 5% of high school seniors think of themselves as being creative. But if you speak to second graders, 95% of them think of themselves as being creative. You go, wow, what happens in that step? What goes on to make people think or lose that natural creativity and curiosity that's important for us all, no matter what field we go into? You know, that desire to know what is that and who is this and what are the other things I want to. So identifying that and going, that's your purpose. Your purpose is to be the champion, because that was their name already, but to be the champion of what if and why not. And say that everything that you learn in school, you can bring to life in this safe space, because this is the space to play in the grey. Because, you know, we're not teaching you more, we're giving you the space to continue to have those kind of critical thought and understanding. And, you know, so in answer to the question, the journey isn't any different, but it's just the places that you have to look to and to understand. And to find that truth that's going to resonate and then be consistent. Because they can be the champion of what if and why nots forever now. They might do it in slightly different ways as the world evolves, but that's now who they really are as a brand.
You know, I just want to say off that, I think one of the most important things is that with these jobs that are in high demand, a lot of times employers have people on a short list or people who they already want in mind. So I think one of the biggest things that everyone who's on this call can do is be proactive. You know, how can you position yourself proactively? Meet people on LinkedIn. A lot of designers don't go on LinkedIn per se because it's very businessy and not very artsy, so they go on Instagram. But looking at it from my standpoint, we can't hire who we don't interview. And if you don't know we're posting roles and you don't know what we're doing, so I did want to say for everyone on this call, please add me on LinkedIn, add Augusta, add Claire, so you could start the process of getting connected with us to know the openings that we can reach out for you for, because not everyone who's underrepresented doesn't have resources. Sometimes they don't have resources, but sometimes they just don't know the access to the opportunities because they really weren't positioned. And I think we don't really see enough designers utilizing LinkedIn correctly, and all of our jobs are really searched in that area. Now, when you talk about creative jobs, you could be a watch repair person, you could be a gemologist. So creativity and design goes in so many different ways. But the first thing is, how can you best merchandise yourself so you can be seen by Claire, Augusta, and myself, so we can begin the process of courting and communicating with you and building a relationship that may take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get hired, or one more role in the middle. But we just can't find you. We just can't hire you and work with you. So I think it's so important, you know, what Claire was saying, that we have to know you're out there. And, you know, you could be the king or queen of what ifs and why nots, but if we don't know who you are, not yet in the workforce or at our organization, we can't build that bridge to get you in there.
Doug, in the past, you've spoken about increasing the diversity IQ of leadership so that everyone is more comfortable speaking and talking about it. Further, designers who work in social impact often are doing this work on behalf of people who have traditionally been excluded from power. How do you think young designers can use their creative talent to work towards equity for all?
I think there's a huge, I had the honor of sitting in a Harvard business review. They have a Brace at Work, which is a section of the Harvard Business Review. And after we got through several episodes of listening to it, I was reached out to by the producers of the show, and they go, Doug, can you come on and talk about the language of diversity? Because some of the feedback we've gotten is that we're just jumping into the conversation, but people actually don't know the words to use. So we walk into these DEI conversations with the assumption that people all have the same definition, but you could ask 100 people and it's different 100 times. But we're not really fundamentally telling people what's the difference between handicap, and disability and accessibility. So just using that as an example, the word handicap origin is people that used to have baseball caps in their hand that could not walk and they would beg for money. So they were called the handicaps. Now, we may not know that because it's not a group that we're associated with. But if you are in a wheelchair or you are handicapped, you realize that word is offensive. So you use the word disabled. Now, disabled was also a word with a negative connotation. So now the word accessibility is being used. But I think when we talk about the design, we as young designers need to build voices for causes and things that we may see that need a little nudge. So going to that accessibility example, there's a new disability logo, which is called the accessibility logo. And some of you may have seen it. It's a person in a wheelchair, but they're moving quite fast, not the old photo of the stationary wheelchair. People are looking at the difference of those logos, but sometimes buildings, sometimes our universities, sometimes people are slow to change it. That's a way that people can actually band together and use design to help inform in a very practical and real sense. So I think the diversity IQ, cultural fluency is so important because people just don't know the information. New York State is the first state in America that is having a third checkbox on their driver's license and IDs where you don't need a letter from the lawyer. You don't need a doctor's note. You can go down to the Department of Motor Vehicles and you can select a different gender than is on your birth certificate starting later this year. So what does that actually mean in practical sense with all the design of our world with a two-box system? That's where young designers can say, okay, this is an opportunity for me to take this cause, for me to take this thought, for me to take this idea, and let me work more with Claire and let me work more with Augusta to figure out, is there a way to find a solution to that? So these are the opportunities that are lying in our world, but most importantly, these are the opportunities that are there for us to take if we just know about the language and the importance of it.
Yeah, I
Just
think
on that point, Doug, do you feel that people don't have the discussions because they feel uncomfortable, because they feel that they don't have the language to engage and therefore they don't want to offend?
That's exactly right. We've come from a culture with cancel culture that people, when given the choice, opt out of talking about diversity, equity, inclusion for the fear of saying the wrong thing. So we must encourage those people around us not to criticize, but to teach. It's very important. I know it sounds basic and it almost sounds rudimentary, but if you're scared to talk about race, you don't know the difference between Black and African American, which are interchangeable terms. But if you're uncomfortable saying it, ask someone, how would you like to identify? When the person replies how they like to identify, then you can have a conversation and say, well, I like to identify as this. And then you can have a conversation about it. But when you make the assumption that this person must be something, and then the person looks at you and goes, then you go, you know what? I'm out. I don't know anything about this. I really shouldn't have gotten in here in the first place. But this is part of the ongoing process. And it's a double-edged sword. Some people just want you to move out of the way and let them be themselves. Some people want the majority to know the words and don't think it's their responsibility to teach them. So it's so splintered and decentralized. It's hard to really put a concrete action on it. But the point is, there's no critical mass for DEI, and there's definitely no critical mass for DEI design. So the more people that are interested in this, we can raise the sea level, because there's way more opportunities than we believe if you just knew how to connect the dots and build the bridges to the opportunities that are out there.
Hey, Doug, we find that just like you said, just having those conversations can be hard for folks. And we find sometimes it requires them to be vulnerable in ways they might not want to be. How do you start getting people in that space?
Well, I think it starts at different levels. It depends on, top, middle, entry level, kind of 3 different layers to it. But I think the first thing is to have people within the organization feel that there's a safe space to talk about it. And I don't think really, maybe in the last year, more safe spaces have been built, but really prior to the 2016 election, I don't know how many corporations were really actively involved in any political messages within their walls. It was almost like religion and talking about your pay periods. You know what I'm saying? And people were like, I can't do that in these walls. But then when Donald Trump in the election of 2016, it was impossible to actually not have the conversation because everyone who works in your organization has a news. And, you know, if you look about the Me Too movement, some people would say that was a result of the 2016 election. It had always been there, but it needed the 2016 election to kind of get to the next level. So a lot of these things are already there, but they need some social trigger to elevate them to become part of the general conversation. Once they're part of the general conversation, companies feel that they can speak on it. When I became a diversity officer in 2012, the turning point for me was actually Oscars So White. That was when people realized they could not believe that they were unaware of how and who was nominated, but they needed to hear that from an organization that they looked at for many years. So I think, you know, it is a slippery slope, but the conversation right now is really around Stop Asian Hate. It's growing, it's becoming international, and it did start with a small thing. But if you talk to anyone in the Asian community, they will tell you it has been going on. It just wasn't given that stage to speak. And I think the news media is trying to find that outlet. Companies are trying to find that outlet. And if everybody criticizes everybody along the way, it just becomes hard for you to break through it because it comes a situation where people opt out and don't talk about it. So we just have to be supportive.
I think that's the key thing for me around so many of these subjects is that they've lost the art of a conversation, and that I can disagree with your point of view, but we're not going to come to blows over it. You know, it kind of, the whole, you know, very much driven, I think, by politics, but also kind of, even if you think about trolling and Twitter and how people behave, and again, technology, because people are removed from the consequences of it. They can say something online that they would never say face to face to somebody. And I think that therefore is for younger people, certainly, you know, anybody with any creativity and a different way of thinking, to kind of go, how do we diffuse it all? How do we take away? Because there does seem to be so much anger and hate and an immediate response. It's like everybody's on a hair trigger, you know, so therefore you can't have that discussion. And no matter what, and as you say, the cancel culture, everything that's going on is all a barrier to people becoming closer. And it's not, and it can't just be one section of society who are deemed as being liberal, who, you know, who are on the fringes and they're trying to do it, but nobody's listening. It has to be across society. And when you look at where people even get their news as well, the understanding of how to have critical thought around what you're seeing and decide for yourself that there has to be another side to this. It can't just be that one point of view. And I don't know, you know, Augusta, Doug, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Any ideas for a solution, what we can do?
Hold more sessions like this, you know, talk to students about it, say, hey, you're the future. You know, some students are really upset that, you know, they had their college experience and it was all ruined and, you know, this is not how it was supposed to be. But then I talk to people that are 10 years out of school, they go, we wish we got to design the workforce of the future because now we've spent 10 years mastering a thought process and a system. And now that system's being redesigned. So, I mean, it's really how you look at it. You know, but I think it starts with conversations like this and platforms and people putting together, you know, places like Design Nation and smart people coming together and educating and informing and uplifting others.
I agree with that. I think deliberately making the time and the space for the conversation and having, it doesn't have to be strict, but like a little bit of frame around how to have that conversation. Like we're at that point, like you said, where things are so heightened that just putting a little bit of a structure around it, I think helps in our experience, at least, helps people navigate what can be super tense.
Yeah, we just actually had a question come in from the audience. Someone asked, coming from a small rural town in the Midwest, these conversations are often ignored or avoided due to racism or homophobia being systematically implanted and snowballed over multiple generations. How do we start opening up these conversations in academic environments where administrators and educators may already have a bias based on the values of their community?
I love this question so much. I'm just going to jump in right quick because I think so much of our work at agency, like what I hear in that question is not having a presumption around what the right answer is going to be, not having a presumption around what like success looks like in that conversation. And that's just so much of the work that we do in our firm is around um, acknowledging the different sorts of expertise and wisdom that live in a conversation, so that we can open ourselves up to the idea that like our perception of what goodness looks like isn't universal.
Yeah, I think that kind of the perception, absolutely. And just the understanding what are the barriers that are holding people back in the first place? Why are there? And I love that, Augusta, about don't go into something assuming that you might know where you're going to end up. Yeah, because you can't know, because you don't know, you're not the one experiencing the problem, or you're not, but you can maybe start to ask the right kinds of questions or get the people involved who are doing it. We did a piece of work a few years ago now that there's a really great book called The Invisible Woman that talks about how so much research has always been based on men, and whether that's car crash dummies or heart attack, what's going to show up. And so many women were dying of heart attacks because they present differently to men, but because it had only been recorded in this way, so they don't have a pain in their arm and they don't have and just to know that, and then you also see that now if you think about race happening, the amount of deaths prenatal in the UK has just been recorded for a similar reason of people of colour. It's harder to look for all the same traits around the bluing of the skin or the paleness of the lips, all the things that people had historically been in all the medical journals have been taught about. So I think that sometimes we don't even realise there's a barrier there because we're just going, well, this is how it is. This is how seatbelts are designed. Oh no, they're not designed for women. They've been designed around men, and women's bodies are differently. They just size down the male dummy. So yeah, great book to read because it certainly kind of unmasked our eyes to things. But then again, like the conversations we're having here, that's just looking at a woman, the invisible woman. Then if you look about the invisible insert group into that and the work to be done.
Yeah, those are all really great points. I guess I have another question for the entire panel. How do you guys think that design can be used to challenge existing institutions and systems that have led to disenfranchisement of certain communities? And how can the design thinking mindset be applied to the general social impact work in order to further solutions?
I think that the design of the internet is showing how design can help be effective. We know where every pixel is. We know where people are looking. We know where people's eyes are going. And I think if you look at how much effort has been putting in designing, remember when mobile first started and people were like, now, how are you supposed to fit a whole website in this? And there was no hamburger in the corner and people really didn't know how it was going to work. And now you look at it and go, boop, 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 know how to do it. No big deal. Nothing really to see here. But a lot of our buildings are built off architecture, coding, hard physical manual construction. So there is a lot of kind of triggers, microaggressions, inconsistencies, sexism with how many restrooms. There's that famous story that Sheryl Sandberg told about when she went to go use a restroom, and at this first big meeting she was, and they didn't even know where the woman's restroom was. Watching the RGB documentary when she was going up to Harvard Law School, and the similar thing happened with the restroom. So, it's really ingrained in everything that we do. So, that again goes back to the opportunity of of redesigning our workforce around new systems and practices, because historically architecture, just like those crash test dummies, were really built for, you know, one particular group or size person. And that was really why the airbags didn't work and the seat belts were not over the shoulder, because the dummies were so large and they were just one archetype of a person, and it really wasn't effective for mothers, for children, for petite people, for, you know, all the different types of body diversity that's out there. So we have a long way to go, and that's when they talk so much about design and AI. You know, who is looking at this? Are there DEI deconstructions that need to happen in that space?
Yeah, I think that's the, you know, when we say human, we invariably are referring just to men and to white in it historically, you know, and through not, and also that's not people kind of like setting out just to do that. It's a default behavior, isn't it? And it's a default behavior because the same types of people with the same kind of background are talking about the same kind of things, so stuff doesn't move forward. So no matter what the area of creativity or design that you're working in, the diversity of backgrounds contributing to something means you'll come up with things that you would not come up with if you were all just sat in the room. To your point earlier, Doug, about the creative industry, just hiring people from the same other agencies, from the same other background. And it's almost like it's the same agency, different building. You have to look outside all of that. And then you're going to come up with great things. You will, just by the nature of what your upbringing was, and you know what you did on the weekend, the things that you enjoyed were different to somebody else, and all of those experiences together means you're going to end up in a better space. The more thinking that's out in the world and conversations that are had, the better the outcomes are going to be, because that's what creativity is all about. There's no limit to it, is it? We're not kind of done with it. Oh, we've used up all the ideas. No more left.
No more left.
The pot is empty. Building on that, in our work, actually, a lot of what we've been doing is decentering the designer and like decentering the role of the designer. We work mostly in the systems of education, so like with school districts, healthcare, major safety net hospitals, and criminal justice, so like the district attorney's office. And what we found is like that, and our team we are a diverse team. We are Black people, biracial people, Latinx people, neurodiverse people, queer people, etc. And what we found is that where we get that that kind of content juice that you talk about, Claire, is by pushing the design away from us and putting it into the communities that we're working with. And that's because it is and then the design work is with and for communities, and by community, and the wisdom and the capacity and the idea and the solution like are all resonant there. So we are totally in agreement.
I think a nice kind of visual image of that, I remember a friend who's an architect telling me once that when building a space and the grounds around the building, to not decide where any of the paths are going to be, and just let people go and do what they do. And then you soon figure out this is the route that people want to travel, and this is what's going to happen. And, you know, you could put something in and make them want to walk a certain way. But actually, if you wait and see how the community is going to use something, then you kind of find the true paths for things.
Totally. I wonder if we know the same architect who told us that story. I feel like it's also a really, like, it's an asset-based way of understanding folks who like you said, like the dominant tendency is white cis male, and that everybody else is somehow disadvantaged, right? And so, but if we take this other view of what design can look like, it's actually acknowledging and leveraging all of the assets of the community members that are doing the design work.
Yeah, I think all of those points are incredibly thought-provoking points, and I hate to end the panel here just because we got into a lot of different points that I think we could probably talk about for like hours on hours. But I would like to thank the three of you guys so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk at the Design Nation conference. I know that I'm gonna come away from this call thinking about a lot of different things about the way design can impact our community in such a significant manner, I think is something that I forget very often, and I'm sure other students do as well. So thank you guys so much for jumping on this call. We loved having you guys here, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, and add us
Thank
all on
you.
LinkedIn so we can keep in touch with all the people that came here today.
My
Yeah.
phone's been blowing up. Thanks very much, Doug.
Oh yeah, mine has too. People are coachable, coachability high.
All right.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.